Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual program. My name is Andrew Gustafson with Turnstile Tours, and we are so happy today to be visiting the Prospect Park and the Concert Grove Pavilion with our special guest, Sheena Enriquez, is going to be joining us in just a minute. Now introduce our guests. Because we have two of them, as Sheena is going to be joining us from Prospect Park Alliance, and we're also going to take a live look-in with Cindy at the Concert Grove Pavilion, because you can see I am at home, not at the pavilion. So, Sheena, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So, Sheena, you are the assistant architect at the Prospect Park Alliance. Tell us a little bit about your job and your background.
Sure. So I'm trained as an architect, and I joined the Alliance in 2016. A lot of what I do is just working on old buildings. So actually, the Concert Grove Pavilion was the first project I started on. When I started in 2016, I am also working on the restoration of Lefferts Historic House, which hopefully you all can, well, right now it's under construction, but this time next year, hopefully it'll reopen. Yeah, so I just work on if there's an old building that needs reconstruction, or we do a lot of like accessibility projects where we try to make things for people to be able to access of any mobility. Yeah, so whatever needs to get done, our team is full of landscape architects and architects. We have a preservationist and an archivist, and we all work together to just keep the park going.
And so this afternoon, we're going to kind of walk through the many different aspects of that process and how you completed this really, really beautiful restoration of one of my favorite buildings in Prospect Park. So why don't we take a look at it, actually? So Cindy, if you're there, let's have a live look in here. So I'm going to spotlight you. Yeah. So Cindy, can you tell us a little bit about where you are exactly in the park?
Oh, sure. So I am not far from the Lincoln Road entrance. I can't quite see it there, but there's an entrance that's close to where I am. And then for those of you that have come for Smorgasburg, that happens just on the other side, up on Breeze Hill. So you might be able to see steps just in the distance. And then just over to the left here is Concert Grove, which we're going to be talking more about today. But really the star of this program is where we're standing right now and what we're looking at here, which is the Concert Grove Pavilion, of course.
Great, yeah, and hopefully we'll get to a closer look at some of the really wonderful architectural details, although there are a lot of people in the park who use this pavilion on a regular basis, which is great since it was closed off for so many years.
Yeah, just before the program started, there were some summer camps, some children that were using this for snack. So definitely a great place to get in and out of the sun on a day like today.
Yeah, great. So a little bit about kind of what we're going to do today. So we are, thanks so much, by the way, Cindy. Oh, yeah. Actually, yeah, let's just take a little look at some of the little details that we're going to talk about a little bit later on. So we can see these beautiful columns. And we'll talk more about the process of restoring these. And then you're kind of underneath the big, the main attraction of it, which is this beautiful skylight as well. So I think that really comes as a beautiful surprise to so many people when they step underneath this structure, if they're stepping under it for the first time. Great. So yeah, so what we'd like to do now is thanks again, Cindy.
Sure, no problem.
Is first talk a little bit about the history of the structure, and then kind of how we got to this point, undergoing the restoration over the last few years. And Sheena's, like I said, going to walk us through that process. But yeah, so let's first again orient ourselves a little bit where we are exactly. So here's that structure again. Yeah, so you can see that it's called the Concert Grove Pavilion because it's in the Concert Grove towards the southeast corner of the park. And we'll talk about what exactly that means, the Concert Grove, because this is such an important part of the park's history, especially in the early days. And music is still an important part of the park. So again, here you can see from some very early drawings from the park's designers, Frederick Law Olmsted, and especially Calvert Vaux, who is the designer of this particular structure, who we're going to talk more about a little bit later on. And you can see it's sort of at the top of this esplanade that runs down you can see what was the music pavilion on Music Island. And there you can see that esplanade and the structure itself at the bottom of the screen. So this is one of the older structures in the park, built in 1874, and really meant to be sort of one of the focal points of this Concert Grove, the main sort of musical area of the park. And music was meant to be one of the focal points of the park in the early days. So this is a place where people could gather, get shelter, and listen to the music a short distance away over on Music Island. And this is what it would look like down at the waterfront. So you can see all these people gathered, and the bandstand on the right. So there was a little bridge so the orchestras could get over there, and people could gather sort of in this almost like an amphitheater kind of effect going down the esplanade towards the Music Island. And there used to be an accompanying building, which was called the Concert Grove House, which had a restaurant. You can see here at this time, there was a French restaurant, another beautiful ornate building you can see there on the right. So that was sort of the main attraction there. And the Concert Grove Pavilion itself was sort of the outdoor seating area for it. Now, one of the things we're going to talk about on the program today is, how they reconstructed a building for which they really didn't have any architectural drawings for. Vaux's original drawings have not survived. And so looking at some of his other buildings and photographs is one way in which they do that. And Sheena will kind of talk us through that process a little bit. But here you can see this is the original restaurant building. And it has this beautiful ornate front. You can see similar types of design and style if you look at a building we've featured on many past programs and on many of our tours, which is the Well House. And so over time, the park, especially in the middle of the 20th century, really fell on some hard times, and there was a lack of maintenance. And you can see this is in the 1930s or maybe the early 1940s, that it's in pretty rough shape. And a lot of the details that we'll see a little bit later on have disappeared by this point. But the restaurant itself is still intact in the back there. That would be removed in 1949 during a period when a lot of the historic buildings would be removed and replaced with more sort of practical functional structures under the leadership of Robert Moses. And shortly after this as well, they would construct the ice rink, which would completely obliterate Music Island. The ice rink was built over top of Music Island, and the shoreline was completely changed, and a 250-car parking lot was also added to this area. So really completely transformed this entire corner of the park and removed so much of the original design of Olmsted and Vaux. And things really went bad in 1974, which is when the Concert Grove Pavilion burned down. So after they removed the restaurant, you can see this kind of brick structure here in the center where they had built a concession stand, and a fire from cooking there just engulfed the entire building. And so a lot of the reconstruction that we're going to talk about that's been done actually twice over the last 3 decades, really, you can see it basically had to be completely reconstructed due to this fire. And here you can see again, just completely obliterated. And so an effort was undertaken about 10 years later to reconstruct the Concert Grove Pavilion, but again, with the challenge that none of the original architectural drawings had survived. And so at this point, I want to turn it over to Sheena, the architect, to help kind of walk us through this process and talk to us a little bit about, how the restoration that was done back in the 1980s relates to the restoration that you just recently did and completed earlier this year.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. So what we're seeing here are some drawings that were produced in the mid 1980s. So as Andrew had mentioned, right, there was no existing drawings of the structure. So the New York City Parks hired an architect by the name of James La Mancha, and he was based in New Orleans, and he worked with a local New York City firm called Russo and Sonder to try to reconstruct this pavilion according to Calvert Vaux's original scheme. So here we see elevation drawings and sections cut through the building. And as you saw in the 1974 photos, the only thing that really survived were the original cast iron columns. Everything else really needed to be replaced and reconstructed. So here, I love this drawing. So here's a drawing that they put together showing a closer up detail of the roof structure. So everything inside, the structure is now steel, modern steel pieces. The roof is clad in turn-coated stainless steel shingles, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And towards the top of this image, we see the cresting and the finials made of cast irons that were also recreated. And so these don't look like we can look back at the earlier images of the structure before it started falling into disrepair. But so these were sort of, yeah, you see like they're not there. So the architects also didn't really have much to work with. They did have some maybe older, there may have been some images showing them in existence, but so this scheme of the finials and cresting, I would say match the spirit of the original, but they are not exactly matching physically the original cresting and finials at the top. So this is an image that I really like of the opening ceremony in 1988. It was, I'm sure, a very exciting time.
And so just so people are clear on the timeline, so 1974, it burns down. Roughly 1984 is when they start the process of kind of redesigning it or reconstructing the designs of it, and then it's reopened in 1988, right?
Correct.
And so I think a key part of both of these reconstructions is, of course, the roof. And so I thought we're going to kind of walk through the different the different elements of the restoration. So why don't we start with the roof, because that's kind of the core of all of this, and some of the work that was done, and then the work that you had to do subsequently.
Right. So what was found? So the building reopens in 1988, and then it's discovered sometime later that people started noticing that the roof's edge started deteriorating. And then after it was, there was some investigation, the people at the park realized that the roof edge detail was not installed properly or per the La Mancha and Russo's design. So over the past, I would say, 2 decades, we see deterioration. And so there were minor sort of Band-Aid fixes at the roof edge, but the damage where water gets into this wood, and when it can't get out, you start to see rot. So the roof, it needed the repair. In 1988, this turn-coated stainless steel is like a 100-year material. You can install it and it'll last. But everything underneath it started to deteriorate. So that was what really prompted us to raise money, the Alliance to raise money to repair the roof and the structure of this project.
And we can see that this comes from a presentation that was done in 2016. So this was a long time in the making. When did you become involved in the project?
Shortly after this, I joined the Alliance in October of that year. So that I kind of took over. The last person had started this project and moved on. So yeah, so that's when I started. And I don't know if you're familiar with some of these projects. You get you get funding through the city or the state. There's some planning time, and then there's the time where the legal department at the city has to hire the contractor. And so, yeah, you typically see at least 5 years between when a problem's like, yes, let's put some money towards this problem, and then the problem being fixed. So, yeah. But yeah, so to cover, maybe Andrew, we can go back to the roof image. And so we see it's a sweeping roof. There's the skylights there, and then it's mostly covered in turn-coated stainless steel shingles. And then you can kind of tell in this image that there isn't really a straight edge. All the edges at the perimeter of the roof are curved, and that's a particular hard issue to address. If you want to wrap materials around it, straight things are easier to wrap around than curved things.
And so here we can see the work actually being done. So tell us what's happening here along the roof edge.
Okay, so we wanted to see what the condition was. So this is 2017. We called an expert roofer who's worked a lot in the park and throughout the city to come and help us investigate what was going on and what the condition was. And so on the right here, he's trying to reconstruct what the proper edge flashing should be. And on the left, we had asked, there's a company called Suprema, and they make this material usually it's made for flat roofs where you just kind of paint it on. If you ever climb to the top of like a roof of, I don't know, maybe a factory or something, or a commercial building, you may see this material painted down. It's basically like a thick latex, or it's not latex here, but it's a thick material that's painted on, and when it cures, it's watertight. So the issue here is that you can see the roof's edge, it gets pretty flat and it doesn't let water shed that easily. And so we really need to do extra work at this bottom part of the roof, just in case water is sitting there. We don't want it to get under all this material and into the wood. You could see on the left here, he's standing on the wood sheathing there. So yeah, so this was incredibly helpful early on to get these folks out here and help us figure out what to do at the roof edge, which is the most critical, I would think, to the survival of the structure.
And here we can see that flashing again.
Yeah, so this is fast forward to, I would say, early 2020. And so now basically the contractor that was hired to do all the restoration used the information that we gathered in 2017 to do the repairs. Yeah.
And so how much of so did you have to take off every shingle on the roof in order to do this work?
Yes. Oh, actually, well, from the, there's like the upper ridge and the lower ridge. So 100% of the lower ridge had to be pulled off, and we had to. You could see these roofers under them. There's brand new plywood sheathing. So a lot of that had to be replaced because it was so rotted. So we basically had them in sections throughout all of spring, summer, and fall of 2020, with a couple pauses because of COVID. They pulled off all the shingles and had to replace things that were rotted, and then go through this process of waterproofing the very shallow end of the roof. And in some areas, the structure underneath was a little rotted, and these we call them rafter tails. These are new versions, replacing the ones that were rotted before.
And so as we can see here as well, this steel I-beam that's here was not from 1874. This was part of the reconstruction that was done when they kind of had to completely redesign the roof back in the 80s, right?
Correct. Here's a process photo.
Yeah. And tell us again a little bit about this material that was being used for the roof shingles.
Sure. So I think like the trade name is Ice and Water Shield. It's so everything above the the shingles, everything above there we see that says Suprema and that cute elephant, that is a peel and it's like a peel and stick membrane. You see it a lot around windows and on roofs and wherever things we want watertight. So that comes on this roll. And then below this, the shingles, you see it like what I mentioned earlier, this like painted on waterproofing material. And so that's like super adheres to the substrate underneath, and really water cannot get in at all there. So there's a continuous waterproof layer under these shingles that also help to shed the water from the roof.
So hopefully this will last longer than 30 years.
Oh yeah. Especially if you don't, some of this stuff isn't meant to be like in the sun, so that the fact that it's covered, it's pretty, I don't know, I wouldn't say immortal, but it might outlive us.
And how do these shingles themselves compare to what might have been used back in the 1870s when they originally built it?
That's what I was trying to find out. I personally am not sure. One of the roofers on this project has worked on a lot of old buildings, and he was trying to tell me that like he's worked on buildings where they used to have canvas on the roof. Maybe it was impregnated with something. In a project he worked on in Boston. Personally, I'm not sure, and I would really like to know more about that because it's so interesting.
Here we, oh yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Andrew, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, we can see a little bit of the skylight in this image here too, but yeah, tell us what this worker is doing sort of along the ridge of the roof.
Sure. So at the ridge of so this was taken shortly after he and his staff removed all the finials and crusting at the roof ridge. So those were sent to a company called Robinson Iron, and they're based in Alabama. So they were shipped there, and while we continued work here, the finials and the cresting were being totally stripped of paint and repainted in their shop in Alabama. And so so this is just, I think, shortly after that, and the work up here, the roofers are tasked to replace there's metal flashing on top of that ridge. I don't know if you could see where he's sitting is the ridge board, but to the left of him is the metal cover that covers that board. So he his next steps after this is to pull all those pieces out and then put in new ones that are more watertight to keep the water out. Because we did notice that water was getting in up there.
Mm-hmm. And there we can see the before on the top and the after at the bottom with the replacement of those finials. So you can see just some of them were completely missing and had to be replaced.
Right.
And then here, this gives us a view of the roof from the ground. And we're going to talk a bit about some of the interior components in just a second. And so why don't we cut back to Cindy and she can show us around a few of those on the interior.
Sure, happy to. So tell me where you'd like me to take everyone. Well, I thought maybe I would show a bit of the roof since we've been talking so much about that. You can kind of see that here.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm also going to take you inside.
Yeah, actually, could you look up, Cindy, a little bit at some of the so I think this is a good view where we can see kind of the curvature of the roof edge that you were talking about, Sheena. And then all of this beautiful detailed woodwork as well around the roof edge and these pendants that are hanging down, and those pretty much all had to be replaced, right?
That's correct. Yeah, the whole, like the horizontal white band there is all new. Some of these ornament that is hanging down, some of those did survive. And so I would say maybe 30% of them are new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll just pull up a quick before and after picture so folks can see kind of the condition that some of those were in. So there you can see just how rotted that roof edge really was. Oh. And Cindy, you're not visiting Prospect Park alone, are you?
No, Salty's here with me. So she's hanging out over by a bench right now, right near me. But
yeah, I know it's pretty hot, so we won't make you stand outside for another half an hour. But it's great to kind of see this live.
And shall I go inside to show?
Yeah, so why don't you step inside and for the next phase, we're going to talk about the reconstruction of the roof and the work that was done on those, or not of the ceiling, excuse me, and the work that was done on those columns.
Okay.
So I just want people to make a note of the colors in here, both on the columns and on the ceiling, and we'll talk about the process of restoring that.
Okay, I'm going to step in one more time into this.
Yeah, I love the
It really
detail.
surprises you when you're stepping in here and all of a sudden you look up.
Yeah. And the sun, quote unquote sun, shining through there.
Yeah.
Which we'll talk about the restoration that was done on this skylight as well. Beautiful. All right, cool. So yeah, Sheena, let's talk a little bit about the details in here, and why don't we start with the columns?
Sure. So I love this before and after side by side image. So as we had mentioned earlier, the architects didn't really have. They kind of had to formulate on their own what the colors were here. So what we see on the left is the color scheme as installed or as applied by the architects during the 1988 restoration. And of course, it fades over time. And so on the right, this is that recreated. And so there were a number of tests. The process was everything, all the paint has, in order to get this new paint on, you have to strip everything down and put a layer of like this gray primer, and then on top of that, a white paint, and then on top of that, your colors. So what we did was we had the contractor strip 7 of the 8 columns so that we can keep one for reference when it was time to repaint everything and apply the colors in the end. So these images show the contractor. It looks like it already has that first coat of primer, and they are applying that white base maybe, but also the process of removing the old paint was, you know, it's pretty intense. There's a lot of detail. So there's a lot of, you see these images of like getting in there and with small tools and things like that. That had to be done in each and every one. So yeah, so the thing, so when you look at these columns, maybe we should go back to the before and after. So yeah, so we basically tried to match the old colors, and it just took a lot of testing. We'd have the contractor paint the strip of what looked like red, and then once it dried, it didn't look red anymore, and that we just did that kind of over and over again until we found something that matched.
And this is a process they went through back in the 80s as well, right? To try and reconstruct this color palette with basically no reference point, right? Because the paint was completely destroyed in the fire. Who even knows if they were the original color even before the fire happened, and they didn't have any really other reference photos, so color reference photos to work with, right?
Right, that's how I understand it. They didn't have much to work on site or in our, well, the archives didn't really exist then, so.
So yeah, here we can see another detail of them. And from what I understand as well, they kind of used references to other works by Calvert Vaux to try and understand his color palette, including the Springwater House in Central Park, and then some interior elements of another building that he did, which was the National Arts Club. So it's kind of a little bit of a detective work.
Right, yeah.
And this is something you also had to do on the other elements as well that are so beautifully colored.
Right, so when I came into this, I understood as, okay, you take a paint chip and then you go and match that paint chip at the paint store, and then you get a can of that paint color. And so that's really not the case, because once you paint it on, you know, it's really hard. Like, it's just, it doesn't work that way. So it was the same process where, you know, we had a bunch of different paint samples. We applied it, kind of let it dry, and tried to match what it would have been. And so this image on the right, that background is supposed to be a blue paint. These 3 samples are supposed to be blue paint. When we were talking earlier, Andrew, I think the one on the left looks like blue paint and it looks green to you. So it's really funny how, you know, it's just, you have to mock up, and you have to like come back, bring other people to see, bring other eyes on it to get these paint colors right.
It's sort of
right
like,
enough, I guess.
It's like, is this a white and gold dress or a black and blue dress? If you remember that from
exactly.
the internet. Yeah, I mean, I see green, and then I see 2 like eggshell white, but clearly when you see at the bottom, if you look written in marker, they're all supposed to be some shade of blue.
Right.
And to me, the blue, or the blues on the far right, on the right hand photo, look just like the beige that's on the left, in the left hand photo.
Yes, I see that too.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I can see that this is a pretty kind of painstaking process to figure this out. Um, and yeah, like how long did this process take to figure out the color matching for this?
So, I would say it was probably back and forth. It wasn't like day after day.
Right.
This was a pandemic. We were sort of in lockdown. We were sneaking onto the site, trying to do this work. So what would happen was the contractor would put this paint up. He'd let us know. Then we'd come back later, either the next day, and tell him what our thoughts were. And then he'd come back and do another sample. So I think over the course of a few weeks, this particular paint color choosing process happened.
So we actually have a couple questions here. So Catherine asks, what about the the color references you had from the 1988 plans?
So that's a really good question, and we did look at that. So what we have in we scrutinize these drawings. So what we have in the design drawing is that the contractors instructed to provide, say, 5 different paint colors at the wood ceiling. Yet what those paint colors are, we don't have a record of. We may have had that because that would have been decided during construction. And I don't know if those records our archives had some records in storage in a facility that in the last 5 years or maybe 10 years, the facility caught fire. So there are some records that we had not digitized yet that just maybe lost forever. And I suspect maybe that's where those paint colors ended up. Wow. But I really like that question because that is an interesting thing we did uncover when we were trying to figure out these paint colors way back in like 2017.
Wow, that's amazing. We had another question here. Since you mentioned before that this project was a large part of it was done during the pandemic. So how did that impact kind of the course of the project?
So there was an all-out stop on a stop work order, and I think I can't now. I'm trying to remember this. Last year is a blur. So there was at least maybe 1 or 2 months of no work on site, and so what would have been a project that started in 2019 December and completed December 2020 ended up really being completed March 2021. So we had to add a couple months to the construction schedule because things just stopped. And there were other complications, like I had mentioned earlier, the cast iron finials and cresting, but also the posts and railings that you see as you're like walking around the site. Those were supposed to be sent to Alabama. So what happens is that the people from Robinson Iron bring their truck up to New York, pick up the metal work and come and go back to Alabama with it. Yet at the time there was a 2-week quarantine in effect if you're coming from certain states right. outside of New York. So if they were to come up here, they'd be stuck here for 2 weeks waiting before they could go back. So they were trying to balance that out along with whatever else was going on in Alabama at the time, whatever was going on here in New York at the time. So there was a lot of juggling throughout that year.
But it seems like a few month delay is pretty good, all things considered. And I know that the Prospect Park Alliance was able to complete a few big projects that despite the pandemic, which it's been really, really great for the park.
Yeah, we were very fortunate to be able to continue work safely too. There was very specific guidelines from the Department of Buildings about how to keep safe on site, and so they were followed. So yeah, we were all kept safe, and we were able, where we could, continue work.
And so here you can see the final that color matching and the before and after. And all of the really painstaking work that was done to strip all that paint as well, because that water damage really permeated kind of every square inch of the ceiling, it looks like. And then the last little detail is something that we saw already. And if you have any other questions, please drop them in. Oh, I see Bob ask a question here. What were the colors used in the 1980s based on? And were there any original parts available back then? The answer is no, right? There was nothing had survived, right? With any sort of even scrap of original paint on it that they could use.
Hi, Bob. Yeah, so that I'm doubtful, but I can also double check with Amy, our archivist, to see if there is. But I don't think there were, and based on that, we have an architectural record article that we are referencing after that had interviewed the architects at the time, and they had come up with their color scheme based on their visits to that building in Gramercy Park and other Calvert Vaux projects that they were aware of.
And this is, again, like we said at the beginning, sort of it's this beautiful little surprise when you step into the building here. What kind of work did you need to do as relates to the skylight?
This one was actually pretty straightforward. The glass, so you see there's stained glass, and then the opaque pieces are actually just painted pieces of metal. This was all recreated in the 1988 restoration. And so they just the metal needed new paint, and then the glass needed cleaning. So this was probably the most straightforward piece of the project, just cleaning and repainting.
And I mentioned before that you can see the quote unquote sun coming through here. What are we actually seeing here?
So as part of this restoration, we did replace all the light fixtures that are above the ceiling. So here we are probably seeing some daylight, but we're also seeing LED light fixtures that are above shining down.
I think a lot of people don't realize that when they step inside there. But yeah, here we can see a little peek into what it looks like sort of behind that glass from the presentation that was done back in 2016.
Right, so you see that those are fluorescent light fixtures, and we just swapped those out with modern ones, and there's a good layer of dust there on top of the glass, so that is clear now. I also want to point out, I don't know if you could see in the area called Section B, there's at least 15 feet there. From the top of the ceiling to the bottom of the roof. So you can actually climb up there and stand up straight and kind of walk around. There's a lot of space between or under the roof there.
How do workers get in there?
So you bring a ladder, and then there's these ceiling hatches. Maybe you'll notice next time you go, you'll see some ceiling hatches with a lock in them. And so you just unlock the ceiling hatch and put a ladder there, and you can climb on in.
Okay, not
apparently
anyone.
So apparently early on, when someone was investigating like the water damage at the roof, they had climbed in there into the space and found that someone had been living in this cavity. And actually, when I started and I went in up there to investigate for this project, I saw all of that person's belongings that just had not been cleaned. He had moved out by then, but yeah, there was just like, yeah, he had a nice little setup with like a blanket and notebooks, office supplies. I'm not really
Wow.
sure. So yeah, he had a lot of space up there. Or
Wow.
should I say they had a lot of space up there, yeah.
Oh. And there we go. We can see the before and after right there. Well, beautiful. And Marilyn had a question here. So is the skylight lit up at night?
Oh, it is. Also, I don't know if you could see in the photo on the right. On the right, there are other light fixtures in the ceiling. So the whole pavilion it glows at night, and I really encourage everyone to visit after dark. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, and so the pavilion is one of the spaces in the park that people have events at, right? So you can book it if you have an event of 20 or more people. And so I know that over the last several months that it's been open, I see lots of birthday parties and musical performances and all sorts of things happening underneath there. Well, great. So if anyone has any other questions, we just have a couple minutes left. But thank you everybody so much for joining in and sharing and asking some great questions. And thank you so much, Sheena, as well for sharing so much of your insight. A really, really fascinating project. And I'm sure it feels good after 4.5 years to have it done and completed. What was that like, when it finally reopened?
It was really gratifying to have a space that just was fenced off for so long to like look clean and shiny and open, and just watching people happen upon it that didn't know it was there. That's a really satisfying experience. And so it's just so good to be able to give this back to the public.
Yeah, I think that's an experience we have a lot on our tours, because most of our walking tours of the park, we end at Concert Grove, and so to take people in there and as they walk under and as they look up at the skylight, it's a really, really neat experience. But yeah, so thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much to the whole team at the Prospect Park Alliance for bringing this structure back to life in such a wonderful way. But yeah, so anything else you want to add before we go?
No, just to really appreciate the opportunity to share all these tidbits with you all. And thanks for all your support.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. And we will share some more resources about the gala upcoming, of course. We'd love to see you there, but also more information about the restoration. There's some great resources on the Prospect Park website. And join us tomorrow, where I will be the one who's on the ground in the park, where we'll be exploring the Revolutionary War monuments and the story of the Battle of Brooklyn in Prospect Park. So join us for that also tomorrow at 12 o'clock, and join us for more upcoming virtual programs and our tours of the park. So thank you so much. And thank you so much, Sheena.
My pleasure.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.